I was 30 at the time and living alone in a small ground-floor apartment in Fort Collins, Colorado. It was one of those old two-story buildings probably built in the 1980s, with individual entrances facing the street and a small parking lot in the back. The neighborhood was extremely quiet. Families, university students, and a few elderly people who had lived there for years. I had never had any security problems in that area, which honestly made me almost paranoid in the opposite way. I developed strict habits precisely because I lived alone. Every night before going to bed, I checked the windows, locked the front door, checked the kitchen door, and always left my keys in the same spot near the counter. It was automatic. So automatic that sometimes I didn't even remember the exact moment I locked everything, because I did it on autopilot every single day. I worked at a veterinary clinic, and that week I was especially exhausted because a coworker had gone on leave and I was covering several extra shifts. That specific night I got home around 9 p.m., ate dinner while watching TV in the living room, and went to bed relatively early. I clearly remember doing my normal routine before turning off the lights. I checked the living room window, locked the kitchen door, and even tested the handle twice because it was very windy in that area, and I was afraid it might not latch properly. My apartment was small enough that I could hear practically any noise from one room to another. The kitchen door led to the back of the building, where there was a narrow walkway leading to the parking lot. The living room was right beside it, separated only by a short wall. The bedroom was at the end of a small interior hallway. It was the kind of place where any little creak during the night sounded much louder than it really was. I must have been asleep for around 3 hours when I suddenly woke up without understanding why. It wasn't a specific noise that woke me. It was that strange feeling your body sometimes gets before your brain fully processes that something is wrong. I remember opening my eyes completely confused, staring at the dark ceiling while trying to understand why I felt so alert. The apartment was silent, too silent. And then I noticed something that immediately made my stomach tighten. I could feel a faint stream of cold air coming through the hallway. That normally never happened because all the windows were closed. I stayed motionless in bed, listening carefully to the entire apartment. No sounds, no movement. Even so, that bad feeling only got stronger. I slowly got up and partially opened the bedroom door. That's when I saw the faint light from the street lamp shining through the kitchen, and the back door was slightly open. My entire body went cold instantly. I stood there in the hallway staring at that partially open door, trying to convince myself maybe I had forgotten to lock it before bed. The problem was that I knew I hadn't forgotten. I clearly remembered the feeling of the doorknob turning when I checked it before going to my room. Besides, the wind that night was strong enough that the door would never stay barely cracked open like that. It would either be completely shut or slamming against the wall. The way it was positioned looked careful, like someone had left it that way on purpose. I stood completely still for a few seconds, trying to hear any sound coming from the kitchen or living room. Nothing. Just the distant sound of wind outside and the low hum of the refrigerator running. My heart started beating so hard I could feel it pulsing in my neck. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and started slowly walking down the hallway, trying not to make any noise. The faint light coming from the kitchen partially illuminated the living room, but several areas remained far too dark to see clearly. And it was exactly when I reached the entrance to the living room that I heard the sound, a low breath coming from the darkness near the couch. I stopped immediately. It didn't sound imagined. It was someone breathing slowly in a controlled way, trying to stay quiet. My entire body froze instantly. The living room was too dark for me to distinguish shapes clearly, but there was something in that darkness that my brain registered without being able to identify it. I don't know how else to explain it. I took one slow step backward, barely breathing. And then I heard a slight movement coming from the living room. Very subtle. The faint sound of fabric brushing against something. That's when the fear truly hit. Not that initial shock, pure fear. Because I immediately understood there was someone inside the apartment with me, I went back to the bedroom as fast as I could without running and slowly shut the door. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone while locking it. I pushed the small dresser against the door on pure instinct and immediately called the police. I remember my voice coming out low and shaky while trying to explain to the dispatcher that I thought someone was inside my apartment. While talking on the phone, I heard another sound outside the bedroom, one slow step crossing the hallway. Then another, and then complete silence again. The dispatcher started asking questions, trying to keep me calm while sending officers, but honestly, I could barely think straight. I was sitting on the bedroom floor holding the phone with one hand and staring fixedly at the door while trying to control my breathing. The entire apartment seemed silent again, and that was almost worse than hearing movement, because I knew that person was still somewhere inside. At one point, the dispatcher asked if I could hear anything at that moment. Before I could answer, I heard a faint creak in the hallway floor. Very slow, like someone walking carefully to avoid making noise. My heart immediately started racing. Then came another step, and another. The person was walking through the apartment with absolutely no hurry. I remember the overwhelming feeling of vulnerability because my bedroom didn't have a large enough window to escape through. There was only the door between me and whoever was outside. The dispatcher kept talking to me on the phone, but I could barely hear her because I was focused entirely on the sounds in the hallway. At one point, the footsteps stopped directly outside the bedroom door, and then everything became completely silent. Those seconds were probably the longest of my life. I could hear my own trembling breathing inside the dark room while staring fixedly at the bottom of the door, waiting to see a shadow or movement. The person outside didn't try to open the door, didn't say anything, just remained standing there. The dispatcher asked if I could still hear something, and I answered, almost whispering that the footsteps had stopped in front of the room. She immediately told me to stay silent and not leave until the police arrived. That's when I heard a very faint sound coming from the doorknob, not a strong attempt to open it. It sounded like someone simply placing a hand on it slowly. The handle moved a few millimeters and then stopped. My entire body began trembling uncontrollably, and the worst part was imagining that person standing on the other side, knowing exactly where I was. A few seconds later, I heard the slow footsteps moving away down the hallway toward the kitchen. Then silence again. After that came a low metallic sound, like someone touching metal against something as if they were messing with the back door. Right after that, I clearly heard the kitchen door slowly open, and then nothing, just the wind entering the apartment again. I remained sitting on the bedroom floor, unable to move even after the sound stopped. The dispatcher kept repeating that the officers were almost there, but honestly, those minutes felt like hours. The entire apartment was silent again except for the wind coming through the kitchen and occasionally making some object lightly tap against something. That made everything worse because every tiny noise sounded like someone coming back through the hallway. At one point, I heard voices outside the building and lights partially shining through the bedroom curtain. Shortly afterward, someone banged loudly on the front door, identifying themselves as police. I don't think I've ever felt relief that immediate in my life. I practically shouted that I was in the bedroom. The officers quickly cleared the apartment while I remained locked inside. Only a few minutes later did one of them knock on the bedroom door saying it was safe to come out. When I finally pushed the dresser aside and opened the door, my legs were so weak I had to lean against the wall. At first glance, the apartment looked completely normal. Empty living room, empty kitchen, no immediate signs of forced entry, just the back door open, letting cold air into the apartment. The officers started carefully checking everything while I tried explaining exactly what I heard. One of them immediately went to the kitchen and noticed the back door lock wasn't broken. That made me even more nervous because it meant the person had probably entered without forcing anything. The officer asked several times if I was absolutely certain I had locked it before bed. And I was, there was no doubt about that. While another officer checked outside the apartment with a flashlight, the first one continued looking around the living room. That's when he noticed something strange near the couch. There were faint marks in the carpet, like someone had been crouching there for a long time, exactly facing the entrance to the hallway leading to my bedroom. That made my stomach drop immediately because it confirmed I really had heard breathing coming from there. A few minutes later, the officer outside returned saying he found wet footprints near the fence behind the building, leading toward a dark side street. Not running footprints, walking normally, as if whoever left wasn't desperate to escape. That disturbed me more than anything else that night. The police stayed in the apartment for almost an hour, asking questions and checking around the building. They asked if I had a problematic ex-boyfriend, strange neighbors, or anyone who knew my schedule. The truth was I lived an extremely ordinary life back then. Work, home, grocery store, gym, nothing beyond that. One of the officers commented that quiet break-ins in ground-floor apartments were more common than people imagined, especially in peaceful neighborhoods where residents became too relaxed about security. But there was one part of the situation even they couldn't fully explain. It didn't seem like robbery. No drawers had been opened. No electronics were missing. My purse was still in the kitchen exactly where I left it before bed. The officer even suggested maybe the person entered thinking the apartment was empty and fled when they realized I woke up. But that didn't make sense to me either, because someone who enters by mistake doesn't stay crouched in the dark living room, breathing quietly during the middle of the night. Someone who enters by mistake also doesn't slowly walk to the bedroom door and stand there listening. Instead of fleeing immediately, that person knew I was there, and they seemed far too comfortable inside my own home. After the police left, I simply couldn't stay alone in that apartment that night. I called my sister crying and went to sleep at her house before dawn. In the following days, I tried convincing myself the worst was over. I immediately changed the back door lock, installed a simple camera facing the entrance, and started leaving a light on all night. Even so, I could never relax there again. Any small sound in the hallway immediately put my entire body back on alert. The most disturbing part was remembering the feeling I had when I woke up that night. It's like some part of my brain had sensed that person's presence before I even opened my eyes. About a week later, I talked to an older neighbor who had lived in the building next door for many years. When I mentioned the break-in, he stayed silent for a few seconds before asking if the kitchen door had been only slightly open when I noticed it. That instantly chilled me. I asked why, and he replied that another woman who had lived in my apartment years earlier described the exact same thing after a similar attempted intrusion. According to her, she woke up in the middle of the night feeling cold because she found the back door slightly open, and she heard someone breathing in the living room before managing to lock herself in the bathroom. After that conversation with the neighbor, I started feeling much worse inside that apartment. Because until then, I had tried treating it like an isolated incident, knowing someone else had gone through something extremely similar in the exact same place. Completely destroyed that feeling. I started researching more about the building and discovered it had a history of poor maintenance on the back doors, because several old locks could be opened easily with enough pressure or simple tools. Even so, that still didn't explain the behavior of the person inside my apartment. The fact they stayed there silently, walked slowly through the apartment, and stopped directly outside my bedroom remained the most disturbing part. About 2 weeks after the intrusion, the camera I installed in the kitchen captured something strange during the night. It didn't show anyone entering, but around 2 a.m. it recorded the back door handle slowly moving twice, like someone was testing the lock from outside. My blood went cold watching that footage on my phone the next day, especially because I hadn't heard absolutely anything that night. That recording was the moment I definitively decided to leave. I managed to break the lease shortly afterwards, citing safety concerns, but honestly, it still took me months before I could sleep normally again. Every time I woke up in the middle of the night, my first automatic reaction was checking whether light was coming through the kitchen or if any door was partially open. I still do that without realizing it. The strangest part is they never found out who entered that apartment. The police found no useful fingerprints. No one in the neighborhood saw suspicious movement, and the footprints in the back disappeared after a heavy rain later that same week. But there's one final thing I've never been able to forget. A few days before moving out, while finishing packing boxes in the living room during the afternoon, I found something stuck behind the couch where the officers discovered carpet marks that night. It was a small folded piece of paper, crumpled like it had accidentally fallen there. When I opened it, there was only one handwritten sentence in crooked letters. She woke up too early. I never showed that to anyone besides my sister because honestly, I didn't want to hear that it might have been a joke or just paranoia. But to this day, whenever I think back to that night, I keep wondering the same thing. If I hadn't woken up at that exact moment because of the cold draft, maybe I never would have known there was already someone inside the apartment watching me from the darkness of the living room. Story 2. I was 22 at the time and in my second year at the University of Oregon. Since rent near campus was absurdly expensive, I ended up moving into an old shared house with 3 other students I barely knew. The house was on a more isolated residential street away from the university's main area, surrounded by large trees and old wooden buildings. It was the kind of house that had clearly been passed through by countless students over the years. Old carpet, creaking floors, peeling paint in some corners, and noisy plumbing. Even so, it seemed great to me at the time because the rent was much cheaper than a private apartment. My room was on the second floor at the end of a narrow hallway. It was small, but enough. A twin bed, a desk for studying, and a huge built-in closet taking up almost an entire wall. The other roommates were almost never home. One worked nights at a bar, another spent most of his time with his girlfriend, and the third practically only showed up to sleep. So a lot of the time I spent hours alone in that house, especially at night. At first I thought the silence was perfect for studying. Later I started to hate it. From the very first day, my room had a strange feeling that I tried to ignore. Nothing supernatural or anything like that. Just uncomfortable. The ceiling was low, the walls felt stuffy, and there was a constant smell of old wood mixed with dust that never completely disappeared. The built-in closet was probably the strangest part of the room. It covered almost the entire wall beside the bed and had two large, thin wooden doors that were clearly warped and misaligned from age. The inside was very deep, deeper than normal closets usually are. When I moved in, I even thought it looked more like the entrance to an old storage space converted into a closet. But I didn't think much about it. During the first few weeks, everything seemed relatively normal besides the usual sounds of an old house. Floors creaking during the night, pipes vibrating, doors shifting slightly when the wind changed. The problem started on a Tuesday near the end of the semester, when I was staying up late studying for finals. I had been awake until late writing a paper while heavy rain poured outside. The room was silent except for the constant sound of rain and my laptop keyboard. That's when I heard a small creak coming from the closet. I looked automatically and noticed one of the doors had opened a few inches by itself. At the time, I didn't even find it scary. My first thought was that the old wood simply didn't fit properly because of the moisture from the rain. I got up, closed the closet door, and went back to my desk without paying much attention. About 10 minutes later, I heard the same creak again. When I looked over, the door was open again in exactly the same position. That started irritating me more than frightening me. I got up again, pushed the door harder, and even tested it several times to make sure it was shut correctly. I remember noticing at that moment that it never fully closed all the way. There always seemed to be slight resistance before it completely latched, like something inside was preventing the door from aligning properly. Even so, I managed to leave it almost shut and return to my laptop. It didn't take even 5 minutes before I heard another slow creak behind me. The door had opened again, only a few inches, enough to create that dark gap beside the bed. I stared at it for a few seconds, feeling a strange mix of irritation and discomfort, because there was no airflow in the room. The window was closed, the fan was off, and even so, the door kept opening repeatedly on its own. After the third time, I started paying closer attention to the closet. I got up, turned on my phone flashlight, and shined it inside, trying to see if something was blocking the door. The interior was much larger than it looked from the outside. There was a deep section behind the hanging clothes where the light barely reached. The floor was covered with old scratch marks and dark stains in the wood. While pushing the door shut again, I clearly felt that small blockage near the end of the motion. It didn't feel like warped wood. It literally felt like something was preventing the door from fully closing from the inside. That genuinely started making me uncomfortable. I removed some backpacks and old boxes from the back, trying to find whatever was jamming the door, but I couldn't find anything obvious. Even so, there was always that slight resistance whenever I tried to shut it completely. At one point, I even knelt on the floor, shining the flashlight along the sides of the closet, because I started thinking maybe there was a bent rail or some loose piece. But the more I looked, the more I got the strange feeling that the space was too deep, like it extended farther than it should behind the wall. Eventually, I gave up and simply placed a chair in front of the door to keep it from opening again. I thought that would solve the problem. I went back to studying, trying to ignore it. But after that strange feeling inside the closet, I started noticing the sounds in the room much more intensely. The problem with old houses is that everything makes noise. Wood creaks constantly, plumbing vibrates, footsteps in the hallway sound closer than they really are. And once you're already uncomfortable, your brain starts turning every tiny sound into something bigger. About half an hour later, I heard a faint dragging sound behind me. I turned immediately and felt my stomach tighten. The chair I had placed against the closet was slightly out of place, and the door had opened again behind it. Not much, just enough to create a dark crack. I stood there staring at it, trying to rationalize. Maybe the chair had slipped on the carpet. Maybe I had placed it crooked without realizing it. Even so, There was something deeply wrong about the situation. I slowly got up and reached toward the door again. The room felt colder near the closet. I don't know if it was my imagination because of anxiety, but I clearly remember that sensation of still, icy air coming from the dark opening. When I pushed the door shut again, I felt the resistance once more. This time stronger, as if something were pressing against it from the other side. My heart started racing at that moment, not because I was thinking about anything supernatural. My fear was much simpler and more real. For the first time, the idea that someone could be hiding inside started forming in my head, and the more I stared into the dark interior of the closet, the more possible it seemed. The house was old. The other roommates were almost never around. I barely knew who had lived there before. I started remembering all those horrifying stories online about intruders secretly living inside shared homes. Even trying to stay rational, my entire body went on alert. I grabbed the metal bat I sometimes used for intramural games at college and stood there staring at the closet, trying to decide what to do. The silence in the room felt unbearably heavy now. I could barely even hear the rain anymore because all my focus was on that door. Finally, I lost patience and yanked the handle hard, trying to fling the door open all at once. The door slid violently to the end with a loud scraping sound, and then an immediate chill shot through my entire body, because the space behind the hanging clothes was large enough for an adult person to stand hidden inside. My brain completely froze staring into that dark space behind the clothes. My phone flashlight illuminated part of the closet, but the deepest section remained too dark to see clearly. There was no one visible there at that moment. Even so, the sensation that someone could have been standing there seconds earlier hit me instantly. The back of the closet seemed much deeper than should have physically existed behind that wall. There were strange marks on the wooden floor, as if something heavy had repeatedly been dragged in and out. There was also an old blanket folded in a dark corner that I was absolutely certain I had never seen before. My heart was pounding so hard I started feeling pressure behind my eyes. I stood completely motionless, holding the bat while scanning the interior for movement. Nothing. Just clothes swaying slightly from the door opening and that suffocating smell of dust and old wood coming from inside. After several minutes trying to convince myself I was overreacting, I started feeling ridiculous. I thought maybe the space only seemed larger because of the darkness and depth, so I pushed all the clothes aside and partially climbed into the closet to inspect it more carefully. The back wall was solid. No secret passage. No hole in the wall. Just old wood and a few dark marks near the floor. Even so, there was something extremely uncomfortable about that space. The air inside felt warmer and more suffocating than the rest of the room, as if someone had genuinely remained there for a long time. When I stepped out of the closet, I decided I was too exhausted and paranoid to keep studying that night. I closed the closet doors again, this time leaving the metal bat leaning against them, and went to brush my teeth, trying to forget the entire thing. The problem was that after that initial feeling, my entire room felt different. Every dark corner kept me alert. Every tiny sound from the hallway made my stomach tighten. When I finally turned off the lights and lay down, I spent several minutes staring directly at the closet in the dark. The faint light from the street lamp outside partially came through the curtains, illuminating just enough for me to see the outline of the closed doors. I think I started drifting off after almost an hour of trying to relax, and that's when I heard the sound coming from inside the room itself. A low noise of fabric slowly scraping near the study desk behind me. At that instant, my entire body jolted awake like I'd been electrocuted. I was still lying on my side facing the closet when I clearly heard that sound coming from the opposite side of the room. It didn't sound like house noises. It was too specific, like someone slowly moving fabric or clothing while trying not to make much noise. My heart started pounding so hard that every trace of sleep instantly vanished. I stayed motionless, listening carefully while my eyes adjusted to the darkness. The room became almost completely silent again. Then I heard it once more, a faint dragging sound near the desk. Slowly, I turned my head in that direction. The weak light filtering through the curtain illuminated only part of the room, leaving the desk corner almost entirely buried in shadow. I couldn't see anyone. Even so, at that moment, I became absolutely certain I wasn't alone in there. I slowly grabbed my phone without taking my eyes off the darkness and turned on the flashlight. The instant the light pointed toward the desk, the sound stopped completely. The room looked empty. Chair in place. Backpack on the floor. Laptop closed, nothing out of the ordinary. But then I noticed something that made my stomach turn cold. The closet was open again, Both doors had separated several inches in the darkness while I slept, and the metal bat I had left leaning against them was lying on the floor near the bed. I immediately sat upright, trying to understand if I could somehow have knocked it down myself without realizing it. That's when I heard a small creak coming from the hallway outside my room. Completely frozen, I slowly turned toward the door. The silence returned instantly, but now I could hear something else too. Breathing, very low. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from somewhere inside the room itself. My entire body went into panic instantly. I jumped out of bed, holding the phone as my only light source, frantically pointing it toward every corner of the room. Closet, desk, under the bed. Nothing. And then the flashlight partially illuminated the bedroom door. That's when I noticed something moving slowly behind it. Not outside. Behind the partially open bedroom door itself against the wall. A dark shape pulling back the instant the light hit it. I screamed immediately and instinctively charged toward the door with the metal bat. As soon as the phone light fully illuminated that corner, I saw a man crouching behind the bedroom door trying to hide from the flashlight. It was one of the most horrifying and surreal moments of my life, because my brain simply could not process how someone had managed to stay inside my room without me noticing. The guy looked maybe in his 30s, extremely thin with an unkempt beard and dirty dark clothes like he'd been wearing the same outfit for days. The moment the light hit him, he immediately raised his hands and darted out from behind the door far too quickly, trying to squeeze past the bed toward the hallway. I instinctively stumbled backward while he rushed through the room, almost tripping over himself. I remember the smell coming from him. Old sweat, dust, and something damp like clothes stored away for a long time. The man didn't say a single word. Didn't even look directly at me. He just bolted into the hallway the second he found space to escape. I stood frozen for a second before running after him, screaming for the other roommates in the house. But the hallway was already empty when I got there. I heard a door slam violently downstairs and then complete silence again. My heart was pounding so hard it felt impossible to breathe properly. I immediately called the police while practically screaming to wake the other roommates. The most terrifying part was realizing none of them had any idea who the man was. One of the guys in the house initially thought I was having a panic attack or confusing some drunk college student. But when we started checking downstairs, we found the laundry room window partially open in the back of the house. The police arrived within minutes and searched the property and surrounding area, but they never found the man. The worst part came when the officers began examining my room more carefully. One officer checked inside the closet with a flashlight and found something hidden behind the boxes in the back. Empty water bottles, old food wrappers, and a thin blanket crumpled in the dark corner. My blood went cold instantly, because that meant someone had probably been using that space for much longer. Long before that night, the police spent nearly 2 hours questioning everyone and trying to understand how someone could enter and leave without being noticed. Their main theory was that the man had been accessing the house through the laundry room window, which had an old latch easy to force open from outside. The problem was that it still didn't explain how he managed to stay hidden so long without anyone noticing. My room was tiny. The closet was literally beside my bed, and the idea that someone had been hiding there while I slept, studied, or changed clothes started making me physically sick. One officer asked if I had noticed food disappearing or objects being out of place. At that moment, I started remembering all the strange little things from the past few weeks that I had completely ignored. Granola bars disappearing from my backpack, water running out too quickly, the closet door always slightly open. Even the strange smell in the room suddenly made sense. When I told them about the closet door never fully closing, the officer immediately looked at the interior and said something that gave me chills. He was probably holding the door from the inside whenever you tried to close it. I stared at the closet trying to process that possibility, because that meant that while I was pushing the door, thinking there was some warped wood blockage, there may literally have been a person on the other side silently holding it shut. After that night, I could never enter that room normally again. The university helped me get temporary housing somewhere else while the police continued investigating. But honestly, I could barely sleep in any enclosed room for weeks. Every time I turned off the lights, I imagined someone hiding silently in a dark corner watching me. The most disturbing part was learning later that previous residents of that house had complained about similar things. One girl mentioned hearing footsteps in the hallway late at night even while alone. Another student said objects constantly appeared out of place. No one ever imagined someone might actually be entering the house and secretly living inside it. The police never found the man again, but one detective told me weeks later they suspected he was a homeless drifter, using shared student houses near campus as temporary hiding places. According to them, situations like that were extremely rare, but happened more often than people realized in college towns. Even so, there's one thing I've never been able to forget. The night before I found the man, I briefly woke up during the night with the sensation that someone was watching me in the dark. I remember staring at the partially open closet for a few seconds before falling back asleep. Now I think about that moment all the time, because most likely, at that exact moment he was already awake inside the closet staring back at me. I was 34 at the time and lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was a simple single-story house with 2 bedrooms and a narrow bathroom in the middle of the hallway. The neighborhood was quiet, a little far from the central part of the city, full of empty lots and streets that were barely busy at night. I worked early mornings at a mechanic shop and lived an extremely repetitive routine. I'd come home, eat dinner while watching television, take a shower, and go to bed early almost every day. I always liked keeping the house completely silent during the night. In fact, I had the habit of turning off absolutely every light before going to sleep, because I hated brightness leaking into the bedroom. It became an automatic routine after years of living alone. Every night I practically followed the exact same sequence: check the back door, turn off the kitchen light, switch off the TV in the living room, and finally turn off the bathroom light before going into the bedroom. The house was small enough that any light left on would partially illuminate the entire hallway. So I would immediately notice if something were on during the night, and that was exactly what woke me up that night. A glow partially coming through the bedroom door. I remember opening my eyes still half confused and immediately noticing that strip of white light spilling into the dark hallway. My first thought was that I must have accidentally forgotten to turn off the bathroom light before going to bed. That had happened a few times before when I was exhausted from work. I grabbed my phone to check the time. It was 2:13 in the morning. The house was completely silent except for the distant sound of the air conditioner running in the living room. I slowly got up, still half asleep, and walked into the hallway. The bathroom light really was on. The door was partially open exactly the way I usually left it at night. At that moment, I didn't think it was strange, just annoying. I walked into the bathroom, turned off the light, and returned to the bedroom almost in complete darkness. I don't think even 10 seconds passed after I lay back down before I heard the click of the switch again from the hallway, and the light immediately returned beneath the bedroom door. At that instant, I felt that immediate discomfort that completely destroys your sleepiness. I stayed frozen, staring at the strip of light on the floor, trying to rationalize it. I thought maybe there was some electrical issue with the switch. The house was old and had small problems before. Even so, there was something deeply wrong about the feeling I had in that moment. I got up again, now much more awake, and walked back into the hallway, trying to convince myself it was only faulty wiring. The bathroom light remained on exactly as before. The rest of the house was completely dark and silent. I stepped into the bathroom and stared directly at the switch, expecting maybe to hear some electrical crackle or notice a loose connection, but it looked normal. I turned the light off again and stood there for several seconds in the darkness. Nothing happened. The bathroom was small, cramped, and poorly ventilated. There was only a narrow little window above the shower facing the back of the house. I remember the faint smell of moisture and cleaning products still lingering in the air while I waited for something to happen. After almost 30 seconds with no problem at all, I started feeling ridiculous for being so uncomfortable over a light bulb. I returned to the bedroom, lay down again, and closed my eyes, trying to relax. And then I heard it again. Click. The light turned back on in the hallway seconds later. This time my entire body went ice cold instantly. I sat upright in bed, staring at the bedroom door while that white glow appeared beneath it again. The problem now was that it no longer felt like an electrical issue. The switch made a very specific click whenever it was physically pressed, and I had just heard exactly that sound coming from the bathroom. I sat there for several seconds, trying to hear anything else in the house. No footsteps, no movement, only silence. Even so, the fear started growing quickly because there was this overwhelming feeling that I was not alone in there. I grabbed my phone and used the flashlight while slowly walking down the hallway once more. The bathroom was illuminated again, but this time the door looked slightly more closed than before. Not completely shut, just less open. That immediately put me on a completely different level of alert, because I was certain I had left the door almost fully open when I walked away seconds earlier. I stopped a few steps before the entrance, staring fixedly at the lit bathroom. That's when I heard a very faint sound coming from inside, something lightly scraping against the floor. Like someone slowly shifting their foot while trying to remain silent. At that instant, my heart started pounding so hard that I felt that strange tingling sensation in my arms. I froze completely in the dark hallway, clutching my phone while trying to listen more carefully. The sound stopped immediately the second I froze. The bathroom returned to complete silence. Even so, I knew I had heard something in there. It didn't sound like plumbing. It didn't sound like house noises. It sounded like movement. My first thought was completely irrational. I imagined some animal trapped inside. But the feeling in my stomach said otherwise. The bathroom door remained partially closed, leaving only a narrow strip of light across the hallway. I kept staring at the opening, waiting to maybe see a shadow or movement. Nothing happened for several seconds. Then I took one slow step forward. And at that exact moment, I heard another noise from inside, very faint. The muffled sound of something brushing against the shower curtain. My entire body instantly turned cold, because that meant something was moving inside while I stood there staring at the door. I took another slow step while trying to control my breathing. That's when the bathroom door slowly started moving by itself. It wasn't sudden. The door simply began closing slowly from the inside, inch by inch without any hurry, like someone carefully pushing it to avoid making noise. I stood completely frozen watching it happen in front of me, unable to react for several seconds. The bathroom light gradually narrowed until only a thin sliver remained crossing the dark hallway, and then the door stopped. I automatically stepped backward, feeling an overwhelming rush of adrenaline. Because at that instant, every doubt disappeared. There was someone inside the bathroom. I ran back to the bedroom, practically stumbling, and locked the door immediately. I grabbed my phone with hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock the screen to call the police. While speaking to the dispatcher trying to explain what was happening, I heard another sound coming from the hallway. Footsteps, very slow, not running, not trying to escape, just footsteps slowly crossing the house. My heart felt like it was exploding inside my chest while I stared at the bedroom door, waiting to hear the handle move at any second. The footsteps stopped near the kitchen. Then I heard a small metallic sound coming from the direction of the back door, and then complete silence again. The dispatcher stayed on the line with me the entire time, while I tried to control my breathing inside the dark bedroom. I could hear my own voice shaking while explaining that someone had probably entered the house. The worst part was the silence after those footsteps, because I didn't know whether the person was still standing somewhere inside the house or had already gone out the back. At one point, the dispatcher asked if I could hear any movement at that moment. Before I could answer, I heard a faint creak coming from the hallway. It didn't sound like footsteps this time. It sounded like wood slowly bending under someone standing still, as if someone were simply motionless outside the bedroom. My entire body locked up instantly. I stared fixedly at the door, waiting for any sign of movement. Nothing came after that, only the distant hum of the air conditioner vibrating in the living room. Those were probably the longest minutes of my life. Until finally I heard faint sirens approaching down the street. A few seconds later, red and blue lights partially flashed through the bedroom curtains. And almost immediately I heard a quick noise coming from the kitchen, like someone suddenly moving in a hurry for the first time that night. The police arrived extremely fast because a patrol car had already been nearby in the area that night. I heard loud banging on the front door and voices identifying themselves while I remained locked inside the bedroom. Moments later came the sounds of movement through the house. Doors opening, fast footsteps, flashlights sweeping through the rooms. Finally, one of the officers called my name, saying it was safe to come out. When I unlocked the bedroom door, my legs were so tense I could barely walk properly into the hallway. At first glance, the house looked completely normal. Empty bathroom, empty living room, empty kitchen. Except the back door was partially open, letting cold wind into the house. One of the officers immediately noticed that the small bathroom window above the shower was also unlocked. And not only unlocked, there were fresh dirt and mud marks on the inside wall beneath it. The officer asked if I usually left that window open. I never did, especially because it was too small to provide any useful ventilation. Another officer then found wet shoe prints on the bathroom floor leading toward the kitchen. My stomach turned instantly looking at them, because it immediately confirmed what I already knew. Someone had truly entered the house while I was asleep. The officers started searching the rest of the house much more carefully after they found the marks on the floor. One of them went straight to the living room and noticed something I hadn't realized earlier that night. One of the drawers in the TV stand was partially open. It didn't look messy, just disturbed. When I checked more closely, I noticed my wallet was still inside, and none of my electronics were missing. That made the situation even more disturbing, because it seemed like the person had entered the house without any clear intention of stealing anything. While one of the officers photographed the marks near the bathroom window, another asked whether I had noticed anything strange before that night. And that's when I started remembering small details I had been ignoring over the past few weeks. The bathroom light turning on by itself had already happened 2 other times, but I had always blamed electrical problems. There were also a few mornings when I found the bathroom curtain positioned differently from how I usually left it. And once I thought I might have heard movement in the kitchen late at night, but I assumed it was just the house creaking. The more I said those things out loud, the worse I felt, because it started seeming possible that someone had already been entering the house for much longer than I realized. After the officers left, I simply couldn't sleep in that house anymore that night. I sat in the living room with every light turned on waiting for sunrise while trying to process the horrifying idea that someone had been silently walking through the rooms while I slept in the bedroom next door. The most terrifying part was thinking specifically about the bathroom, because if the light hadn't turned on, I might never have woken up. Maybe that person would have continued walking through the house without me noticing anything at all. Over the next few days, I immediately changed every lock and installed extra latches on the windows. But honestly, the psychological damage had already been done. Every time I saw light spilling through the hallway during the night, my entire body would go into automatic alert mode. Even the sound of a light switch clicking on in movies or commercials started making me uncomfortable for a while. A few weeks later, I spoke with a neighbor who lived 2 houses down from mine. When I mentioned the break-in, he casually commented that he had seen someone walking through the backyards on that street late at night months earlier. According to him, it looked like a thin man wearing a dark hoodie who would quickly disappear between the houses. The police never found whoever entered my house, but there's one thing I've never been able to forget. While the officers were checking the bathroom that night, one of them looked at the damp footprints on the floor and quietly said, "Looks like he stood in here for quite a while." And honestly, to this day I still think about how long that person had been silently watching me before I noticed the bathroom light glowing in the hallway. Story 4. I was 16 when this happened and still living with my parents in a small town near Indianapolis, Indiana. Our house was in an extremely quiet residential neighborhood, one of those places where practically everyone knows the neighbors and almost nothing serious ever happens. I had always been a homebody, so my parents normally had no problem leaving me alone for a few hours. But this time was different, because it would be the first entire night I'd spend alone in the house while they traveled to visit my aunt in Ohio. It was only a quick one-day trip, but I clearly remember feeling excited about finally having the house to myself. I spent the entire afternoon playing video games in the living room, ordered pizza, and stayed up late watching videos on my computer. At first, it felt great. But there's a huge difference between being alone in a house during the day and realizing you're actually going to sleep there alone in the middle of the night. As the night became quieter, I started noticing the normal sounds of the house much more. Wood creaking, the air conditioner turning on by itself, branches lightly scraping the windows outside. Things I normally never noticed when my parents were home. My bedroom was upstairs at the end of the hallway. It was relatively small with a bed pushed against the wall and very little space underneath because I stored some old boxes there. The bed was low enough that I could never fully see the dark back area underneath without using a flashlight. Back then, that had never bothered me. I probably went to sleep around 1 in the morning after shutting off the computer. I remember the room being warm because it was summer, and I had only a fan running near the window. After turning off the lights, I stayed on my phone for a few minutes before trying to sleep. The entire house was completely silent. And it was in that silence that I first heard the sound, a very faint dragging noise coming from under the bed. At first I didn't get scared. I thought maybe one of the boxes was rubbing against the wall because of the vibration from the fan or something like that. The sound was so subtle it almost felt imaginary. I kept looking at my phone trying to ignore it. A few seconds later I heard it again, a slow scraping sound coming from directly beneath me. That's when I started paying real attention. I stayed completely still in bed, trying to listen more carefully while the fan made that constant humming noise near the window. The sound didn't come back immediately. That reassured me for a few seconds because I started thinking it really had to be a box shifting, or maybe the mattress itself making noise. So I turned onto my other side trying to sleep. And at the exact moment I moved, I heard the dragging noise beneath the bed again. This time clearer, not loud, just slow, like something lightly scraping against the carpet. My entire body tensed instantly. I stayed frozen trying to rationalize it. I thought about the neighbor's dog getting in through the garage, a rat, anything. The problem was the way the sound seemed to respond to my movements. I stayed perfectly still for several seconds. No noise. Then I slowly moved my leg beneath the blanket. A few seconds later came another short dragging sound beneath the bed. My heart started racing at that moment because something about it felt wrong in a very specific way. It wasn't the continuous sound of an animal moving around. It felt reactive, like something was only moving when I moved. I remember lying there staring at the ceiling in the dark trying to decide whether I was becoming paranoid, because it was my first night alone in the house. Part of me wanted to simply turn on the light and immediately look under the bed. Another part of me was absolutely terrified of actually finding something there. And honestly, deep down I think I already knew it wasn't normal. At one point I decided to do a stupid little test to convince myself I was overreacting. I slowly shook my foot beneath the blanket and waited. About 2 seconds later I clearly heard another dragging sound matching the movement. It sounded closer now. My stomach immediately dropped. The room became so quiet I could hear my own breathing speeding up. Then I heard something worse. A very faint sound of fabric slowly rubbing against wood coming directly from the side of the bed, like someone shifting position underneath it. My entire body went ice cold. And that's when I realized something else horrifying. The fan barely reached underneath the bed, but even so I could smell something strange coming from there, old sweat mixed with damp earth. At that moment I started panicking for real. The smell coming from under the bed made everything instantly feel much more real, because it didn't smell like an animal or mold from the house. It smelled like a person. My heart was pounding so hard it felt impossible that it couldn't be heard throughout the room. I stayed completely frozen trying to think about what to do. The problem was that every movement I made seemed to trigger some small sound underneath me. At one point I clearly heard low breathing coming from the left side of the bed. Not heavy, just someone breathing slowly while trying to remain silent. That's when my mind finally accepted what was happening. There was someone under my bed. My entire body immediately started trembling. I slowly grabbed my phone, trying not to make noise while my eyes remained locked on the darkness near the floor. I thought about calling the police immediately, but at the same time I was terrified that any sound might provoke a reaction from whoever was down there. So I stayed frozen there trying to think of a way to leave the room without having to look directly underneath the bed. And the more I tried to stay motionless, the more I felt a presence under there, like that person was waiting specifically to see what I would do. After several minutes that felt like hours, I decided I needed to get out no matter what. My plan was simple: quickly get off the bed from the opposite side and run into the hallway. But before I could do that, something happened that completely destroyed me. As I slowly shifted toward the edge of the bed, I heard another slow dragging sound following my movement beneath the mattress. Like whoever was down there was repositioning too. My whole body froze again, and then, unable to stop myself, I slowly looked toward the dark space near the floor. The faint streetlight coming through the curtain illuminated only part of the room, but it was enough for me to see something moving underneath the bed, a dark shadow slowly pulling back deeper inside after realizing I was looking. At that instant, I completely lost control. I jumped off the bed, practically screaming, and ran into the hallway without looking back. As I ran out of the room, I heard a quick noise from beneath the bed, like someone moving fast across the carpet. I sprinted straight to the hallway bathroom, slammed the door shut, and locked it immediately with hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the key. I sat on the bathroom floor trying to breathe while gripping my phone so tightly my fingers started hurting. My entire body was shaking from adrenaline. I can still remember exactly how it felt leaning against that door listening to the complete silence of the house outside. Because after I ran from the bedroom, everything became completely quiet. No footsteps, no voice, nothing. And that was almost worse than hearing movement. I immediately called the police, talking so fast the dispatcher had to ask me to repeat several things. I remember her asking multiple times whether I had actually seen someone or only heard noises, and honestly I could barely explain it properly at that moment. I just kept repeating that someone was hiding under my bed. While I was speaking on the phone, I started hearing a faint sound from the hallway. Very soft, the floor creaking slowly. like someone walking carefully through the house. My heart immediately started racing again. The dispatcher kept talking, trying to calm me down, but I was completely focused on the sounds outside the bathroom. At one point, I heard footsteps stop directly outside the door, then complete silence. Those seconds were horrifying in a way I still can't properly explain, because I knew that person was probably standing outside listening to me talk to the police. I tried making as little noise as possible while answering the dispatcher's questions almost in a whisper. The bathroom had a small window above the sink, but it was too narrow for me to escape through. So I basically had no escape route at all if that person decided to force the door open. At some point, I heard a very faint sound outside. It sounded like someone breathing close to the wood. My whole body locked up instantly, and then the doorknob slowly moved. Not violently, just a slow movement testing whether the door was locked. I started crying from fear right then without even fully realizing it. The dispatcher heard me and asked if someone was trying to get in. Before I could answer, I heard quick footsteps rushing away down the hallway. Right after that came a loud noise from my bedroom, like something hitting the wall, then silence again. A few minutes later, I heard sirens approaching down the street. I had never felt such relief in my entire life. The officers arrived extremely fast because I was home alone and underage at the time. I heard voices outside calling my name while they entered through the front door. I stayed locked inside the bathroom until one of them knocked, saying it was safe to come out. When I finally opened the door, my legs were so weak I could barely stand. One of the officers immediately brought me into the kitchen, while the others started searching the entire house with flashlights. I could still hear my heart pounding while I tried explaining what happened. I remember repeating over and over that I had seen something pulling back underneath the bed. One officer asked whether a friend might have snuck into the house as a prank. But before I could answer, I heard another officer upstairs yelling for backup. The tone of his voice made me freeze instantly. A few seconds later, there were heavy sounds of movement in the upstairs hallway, fast footsteps, a loud crash of someone falling or slamming into furniture, then shouting ordering someone to put their hands up. I sat completely frozen in the kitchen listening to it all, unable to believe it was real. Shortly afterward, 2 officers came downstairs escorting a handcuffed man. The image of him has stayed burned into my mind ever since. He was extremely thin, with a long, unkempt beard, filthy clothes, and an old hoodie covered in dark stains. The worst part was his expression. He didn't look high or completely disconnected from reality. He just looked empty. One of the officers immediately asked if that was the man I had seen in my room. I started shaking instantly because I recognized the smell coming from him. It was exactly the same smell I had noticed beside the bed. Old sweat, damp earth, and dirty clothes stored too long. Later, I found out he had been hiding under my bed for hours before I even entered the room that night. According to the police, they found an old backpack of his hidden inside the hallway closet and food wrappers in my room near the wall. That meant he had probably been silently moving around the house while I played video games downstairs without noticing absolutely anything. After they took the man away, the officers stayed at the house for a long time, trying to figure out how he had entered unnoticed. They discovered one of the laundry room windows in the back had a broken latch my parents didn't even realize was loose. According to them, the man had most likely entered the house earlier that evening while I was distracted playing games in the living room. The worst part was hearing one of the officers casually comment that intruders sometimes choose houses that appear empty so they can temporarily sleep hidden inside. Except that night he had probably realized too late that someone was still there. When my parents finally came home close to sunrise, I was still sitting in the kitchen completely in shock. My mother immediately started crying when she saw the police activity outside the house. My father compulsively searched every room as if he still expected to find another person hiding somewhere. And honestly, for weeks I felt the same way. Every time I entered a dark room, I automatically looked under the bed before anything else. Even now I still do it sometimes without realizing. A few days later, a detective returned to the house to get more information and said something that made everything even worse. According to him, the man apparently hadn't originally intended to attack me that night, at least not immediately. They believed he planned to stay hidden until the house became completely quiet so he could come out looking for food or things to steal. The problem was that I went upstairs to my bedroom earlier than he expected while he was already hiding beneath the bed. When I heard that, a freezing chill ran through my entire body, because I started imagining how long that person had been literally underneath me, while I lay there scrolling through my phone trying to fall asleep without suspecting anything. And there's one specific part of all this I've never been able to forget. While the officers searched my room that night, one of them pulled several boxes from underneath the bed using his flashlight. That's when they found fresh impressions in the carpet showing exactly where the man had been lying hidden. The marks went almost all the way to the side where my head rested while I tried to sleep, meaning that while I listened to those faint dragging noises in the dark, that person had been only inches away from me, watching me from underneath the bed for a very long time. Story 5. I was 33 when this happened, and I was living alone in an old house in Asheville, North Carolina. The house had belonged to my grandmother before it was passed down to me after she died, so I had known that place practically since childhood. It was an old wooden house on a quiet residential street near the outskirts of the city. It wasn't exactly isolated, but there also wasn't much activity at night. Most of the surrounding houses were occupied by elderly people or small families. Since I worked from home at the time, I spent a lot of time alone inside the house and knew every sound it made, and when I say every sound, I'm not exaggerating. The wood creaked constantly with temperature changes, the plumbing made strange noises during the night, and practically every window produced a horrible sound when opened because of the old wood swollen from humidity. It was impossible to open any of them quietly, especially the kitchen window, which always made a loud, dragging creak whenever someone tried to move it. That was such a normal thing that I used to joke about not needing an alarm because I would immediately hear any window being opened in the house. After that night, I never said that again. It was early October, and the temperature had already started dropping significantly during the night. That evening, I had stayed up late finishing some work in the living room while leaving the television on very low just for company. It must have been a little after midnight when I finally shut everything off and got ready for bed. I followed my normal routine. Checked the back door, locked the front of the house, and checked the kitchen windows because I usually opened them during the day to circulate air. I clearly remember forcing that specific window shut because it always jammed near the end. The creaking sound of the wood was as loud as it always was. After that, I went to my bedroom carrying a bottle of water and my phone. The house became completely silent after I turned off the lights. I think I was almost asleep when I heard a noise coming from the kitchen. A sharp sound of something falling onto the floor. It didn't sound huge. Maybe a utensil or a small object knocked off the counter. At first I thought I must have left something poorly balanced near the sink. That happens sometimes. Even so, something about that sound immediately put me on alert because the entire house had been far too quiet before it happened. I got up still half asleep and walked through the dark hallway toward the kitchen without turning on any lights. The faint glow from the streetlights coming through the living room curtains partially illuminated the path so I could see enough not to trip. As I got closer to the kitchen, I started feeling a faint stream of cold air coming from that direction. That immediately bothered me because I was absolutely certain all the windows were closed. When I entered the kitchen, I immediately saw what had fallen onto the floor, a wooden spoon that normally stayed in a container near the stove. It was lying near the sink, and directly above it, the kitchen window was open a few inches. My entire body instantly went cold, not because the window was open itself, but because I knew exactly what sound that window made whenever it moved, and I hadn't heard anything. No creaking, no dragging wood, nothing. I stood there staring at the dark opening above the sink, trying to convince myself maybe I had forgotten to fully close it before bed. But that made no sense because that window never stayed partially open by itself. It was either completely locked, or it slid with tremendous effort while making enough noise to wake the whole house. I slowly approached the sink, trying to hear any sound from outside. Nothing except wind moving through the trees in the backyard. The entire neighborhood seemed dead at that hour of the night. Even so, I began feeling that horrible tension in my stomach that appears when something feels far too wrong to ignore. I grabbed the window frame and slowly started pulling it shut. And that's when I immediately noticed something strange. The wood near the latch was marked with fresh scratches, as if some thin tool had been used there. I ran my fingers over the marks and felt tiny rough splinters of wood still loose. My heart immediately started racing because it looked far too recent. I kept slowly closing the window while trying not to make noise. But unlike normal, it slid much more easily than it should have, almost silently, as if someone had forced the wood enough for it to lose its resistance. That's when a chill ran hard down my spine because I finally understood what had probably happened. Someone had opened that window slowly on purpose to avoid the creaking sound. And while I was still standing there looking at the marks on the frame, I heard a sound coming from the hallway behind me. A slow step on the wooden floor in the living room. At that instant, my entire body froze. The step had clearly come from the direction of the living room behind me. It didn't sound like a normal house creak. It sounded like weight. Slow, controlled. I stayed completely motionless, holding the window while trying to listen better. The silence returned immediately. And that was the worst part, because it meant whoever was there had probably also stopped after realizing I heard them. My heart started pounding so hard it felt impossible not to make noise. Slowly, I turned my head toward the dark hallway without leaving the kitchen. The living room was submerged in shadow, illuminated only by a narrow strip of light from the street outside. I couldn't see anyone. Even so, there was that horrible sense of presence, like someone was standing just beyond my field of vision waiting for me to move. I kept staring into the hallway, trying to convince myself I was overreacting because of the open window. Then I heard another sound. Very faint, the floor creaking again. A single slow step coming closer to the kitchen. That's when the fear truly hit me for real. Because at that moment I knew I was not alone in the house. I automatically stepped backward behind the kitchen counter while trying to keep my eyes fixed on the dark hallway. My brain started entering that strange state where everything feels both too slow and too fast at the same time. I remember pulling my phone from the pocket of my hoodie without being able to look away from the kitchen entrance. The worst part was not being able to clearly see anyone. I only knew someone was there because of the sounds, and whoever it was seemed to be moving extremely slowly on purpose. At one point, I heard a faint rustling of fabric coming from the living room, then silence again. Then the shadow partially appeared in the hallway entrance. Not the entire body, just a quick dark movement immediately pulling back when the streetlight hit that area more directly. My stomach dropped instantly. I grabbed a knife from the counter almost on instinct while slowly backing toward the bedroom. And that's when I heard faster footsteps coming from the living room. Not fully running, but approaching. The sound of the old wood creaking now clearly crossed the hallway toward the kitchen. I practically ran to the bedroom at that moment. I didn't stay trying to understand anything else. I just remember moving quickly down the hallway holding my phone and the knife, while the footsteps kept coming behind me through the living room. As soon as I entered the bedroom, I slammed the door and locked it immediately. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone onto the floor. I shoved a small dresser against the door on pure instinct and stood there listening to the entire house in silence. My heart was racing so violently it felt impossible to think clearly. I immediately called the police, trying to speak quietly, but my voice came out trembling anyway. While I explained that someone had broken into my house, I heard a sound coming from the hallway, one slow step, then another. The person was walking through the house without any hurry now. The worst part was imagining that they had probably already been inside before the spoon fell in the kitchen, maybe hiding in the dark living room while I slept in my bedroom without realizing absolutely anything. The dispatcher kept talking to me on the phone, asking if I could still hear movement at that moment. Before I answered, the footsteps stopped directly outside the bedroom door. Then everything became completely silent. Those seconds were horrible on a level I will never be able to properly explain, because I knew someone was standing on the other side of the door listening to me breathe. I stayed motionless, gripping the knife while staring at the doorknob, waiting for any movement. The silence became so heavy that I started hearing tiny sounds in the house that normally would have gone unnoticed. The wind outside, the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, my own shallow breathing. Then I heard a very faint sound coming from the door. Not a strong attempt to get in. It sounded like someone merely placing their fingers slowly on the doorknob. It moved a few millimeters and stopped. My entire body began trembling uncontrollably at that moment. The police dispatcher noticed something was wrong from my breathing and asked me to keep talking to her. But before I could answer, I heard the footsteps moving away again through the hallway. Slow once more, then a noise coming from the kitchen. The quiet sound of the window being touched. Then complete silence. A few seconds later, I heard distant sirens approaching down the street. I had never felt such relief in my life. The officers arrived only minutes later and entered through the front door, announcing themselves several times. I stayed locked inside the bedroom until one of them knocked, saying it was safe to come out. When I finally pushed the dresser away and opened the door, my legs were so weak I had to support myself against the hallway wall. The house looked far too normal at first glance. Lights off, empty living room. Silent kitchen, except the kitchen window was open again. Exactly how I had found it before. One officer immediately went to check outside, while another started examining the window frame with a flashlight. That's when he noticed something that made my stomach turn even colder. Besides the fresh scratches in the wood, there were dirty fingerprints near the inside edge of the window, as if someone had held onto it while climbing in slowly. The officer commented that whoever it was had probably used some thin tool to loosen the wood around the latch, without causing the usual creaking sound. Meanwhile, another officer found damp shoe prints on the kitchen floor, partially leading toward the living room. They weren't extremely visible, but enough to show that someone had really walked through the house after entering through the window. While they searched the rooms, I tried explaining exactly what I had heard and seen that night. One officer asked whether anything had been stolen. And honestly, that was the most disturbing part of all. Apparently not. My purse was still in the living room. Laptop, television, wallet, everything untouched. That made even the officers uncomfortable because it didn't seem like a normal break-in for quick theft. One of them asked whether I had noticed strange things in the house before that night. And that's when I started remembering small details I had been ignoring for weeks. Some mornings I found objects slightly out of place in the kitchen. One time I thought the window seemed less securely locked than usual. There were also 2 nights when I woke with a strange feeling of movement in the living room, but I assumed it was just the old house creaking. The more I said those things out loud, the worse I felt, because it started seeming possible that someone had already been entering that house long before I finally noticed the open window that night. After the police left, I simply couldn't stay alone in that house that night. I called my sister, nearly crying, and went to sleep at her house before dawn. The problem was that even far away from there, I couldn't stop thinking about one specific thing. The person entered through the kitchen without making absolutely any noise, and I knew that window better than anyone else. It always creaked loudly. Always. That meant whoever entered had probably spent enough time there slowly manipulating the wood until they could open it silently. In other words, it wasn't impulsive. It was careful, planned. Over the next few days, I only returned to the house during daylight to grab some clothes and try deciding what to do. Every time I entered the kitchen, my entire body automatically tensed while looking at that window. At one point, I even tried opening it the normal way just to hear the wood creak again, and the creaking was still as loud as always. That made me feel even worse because it proved someone had truly needed to force the structure slowly to avoid the sound that night. A few days later, an officer handling the report returned to take more photos of the window frame. That's when he said something that still gives me chills. According to him, the shoe prints in the kitchen indicated the person had probably stood inside there for some time before beginning to move through the house. That completely destroyed me because it meant I might have been asleep while someone silently observed the kitchen and living room in the dark. Not long afterward, I ended up installing cameras and simple sensors throughout the entire house. But honestly, I never regained a sense of safety there. Every creak of the wood during the night made my heart race immediately. The worst part came about 2 weeks after the break-in. I was reviewing old footage from the newly installed cameras, trying to reassure myself, when I noticed something strange in a recording from the first night after the incident. Around 3 in the morning, the kitchen camera captured the shadow of someone standing outside the window for a few seconds. The person didn't try entering again. They just stood motionless looking inside before disappearing from the frame. The police never identified who it was. And honestly, I think that disturbed me most of all in the end, because it made it clear that whoever it was may have known my routines long before that night. Even today, there's still one thing I can't forget. While the officers were finishing checking the kitchen that night, one of them casually commented while looking at the distance between the window and the hallway. He was already inside the house before the spoon fell. And honestly, sometimes I still think that maybe the object was accidentally knocked over while the person moved around in the dark trying not to be noticed. If that spoon hadn't fallen, maybe I never would have woken up while he was still inside the house with me. Story 6. I was 41 when this happened, and I was living alone in a house on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. It was a relatively quiet neighborhood, full of single-story homes with detached garages and open backyards. I never considered the area dangerous, but that year small thefts started happening around the neighborhood. Nothing very violent. Mostly people going through unlocked cars, tools disappearing from garages, and a few quick backyard break-ins during the night. 2 neighbors had bicycles stolen in less than a month. After that, a lot of people started installing cameras and motion sensors around their homes. I worked in electrical maintenance and had always been a little paranoid about security, so I decided to do the same. I installed automatic floodlights in the garage, sensors in the backyard, and two simple cameras connected to my phone. One pointed at the garage entrance and the other at the side walkway leading to the back of the house. The system was basic, but it worked well. Any movement would turn on the lights and send a notification to my phone. During the first few months, it would occasionally trigger because of cats, raccoons, or even strong wind moving the bushes. So I got used fairly quickly to ignoring random alerts during the night. It was early November when things started getting strange. On a Thursday around 2 in the morning, my phone vibrated, warning me about motion detected in the garage. I woke up irritated because I had to work early the next day. I grabbed my phone and quickly opened the camera app, expecting to find another cat wandering through the yard. But there was nothing visible in the recording. The garage floodlight was on, partially illuminating the entrance, but the camera showed nobody at all. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to figure out whether the sensor had been triggered by an insect or some technical problem. A few minutes later, the light shut off by itself and I went back to sleep. About half an hour later, my phone vibrated again. Same alert, movement in the garage. I opened the camera again, and once more there was nobody visible. Just the bright light illuminating empty concrete and part of the silent street. That started bothering me because the sensors normally didn't trigger twice in a row without a reason. Even so, I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep again. But this time the alert returned less than 10 minutes later. And then again. Always at the garage. Always with nobody appearing on camera. After the fourth alert in a row, I was completely awake. I sat up in bed, opening the camera app repeatedly, trying to understand what was happening. The garage looked empty every single time I checked. No cars passing close enough to activate the sensor. No visible animals. Nothing. The floodlight simply turned on by itself and stayed lit for a few seconds before shutting off again. I started thinking maybe a wire was malfunctioning because of the cold weather, since the temperature had dropped a lot that week. Even so, there was something far too strange about the pattern of the alerts. They weren't completely random. They seemed to happen at specific intervals, almost like someone was repeatedly stepping in and out of the sensor's range. At one point, I got out of bed and walked to the bedroom window that partially faced the back of the house. I could see the glow from the garage light reflecting into the yard, but I couldn't see anyone outside. The street also looked completely empty. No movement, no sound. Just the weak wind moving through the dry trees in the yard. After a few minutes staring out the window, the light finally shut off. And right when I started walking back toward the bed, it turned on again. At that moment, I felt a much stronger sense of discomfort because it suddenly seemed deliberate. I stood at the window trying to see anything moving near the garage, but the camera angle left a few blind spots close to the side wall and behind my car. Even so, if someone were walking normally through the yard, I should have been able to see some kind of shadow or movement. But there was nothing. I grabbed a flashlight and seriously considered going outside to check in person, but something told me not to do that. Instead, I decided to review the recorded videos more carefully through the app. That's when I started noticing a strange detail. In the first videos, it just looked like the sensor activating the light normally. But when I watched frame by frame, I noticed something that immediately made my stomach tighten. The light began turning on a fraction of a second before the motion alert officially appeared in the system. That shouldn't happen. The sensor needed to detect something first in order to activate the floodlight. Even so, in every video, the brightness started before the app officially registered movement. I kept reviewing several recordings, trying to convince myself it was just camera delay. But the more I watched, the more it seemed like there was a very specific pattern, as if someone was moving exactly at the limits of the sensor and outside the direct range of the camera. That realization completely changed the feeling of the situation for me. Until then, I was still trying to treat everything like a technical malfunction. But once I started noticing the pattern in the videos, the idea that someone was intentionally avoiding the camera suddenly seemed very possible. I spent almost an hour sitting in the dark bed watching the recordings repeatedly on my phone. In all of them, the same thing happened. First came a slight change in the garage lighting, almost imperceptible, as if the floodlight were beginning to react to movement. Only afterward would the motion notification officially appear, and there was never anyone visible in the image. That was exactly the problem. The camera only captured the front of the garage and part of the side entrance. If someone stayed pressed close enough to the wall or behind my car, they could partially activate the sensor without fully appearing. As I started thinking about that, my entire body went into a ridiculous state of alert. because that meant someone might be testing the limits of my home security system during the middle of the night. At one point, I even opened the system layout in the app to check exactly how far the sensor reached, and I realized something even worse. There was a narrow blind spot near the garage side wall where someone could remain partially hidden without entering the camera's main field of view. I kept staring out the bedroom window, trying to see that specific section of the yard, but from there it was impossible to get a clear angle. The garage light turned on again shortly after 3 in the morning, and this time I watched carefully, waiting for any movement. That's when I noticed something incredibly subtle near the parked car. Not an entire person, just a shadow changing position quickly beside the garage wall. The instant the floodlight activated, my heart immediately started racing. I grabbed the flashlight and shined it through the window, but I couldn't see anything afterward. The garage light stayed on for a few more seconds and then shut off again. And that's when the part that truly scared me happened. A few seconds after the light turned off, I heard a very faint metallic sound coming from behind the house, like the soft click of someone touching the handle of the side gate. My entire body instantly went cold, because that meant whoever was there might not just be watching the garage. They might be trying to find a way closer to the house. At that moment, I completely abandoned the idea that this could be a technical issue. I grabbed my phone and kept alternating between the cameras and the bedroom window, trying to decide what to do. The worst part was not being able to see exactly where the person was. It felt like being watched without being able to locate who was watching. I kept listening carefully toward the back of the house, waiting for another sound near the side gate. The silence returned for a few seconds. Then I heard it again. A short metallic click, like someone slowly testing the gate latch, trying not to make noise. My heart started pounding so hard I felt that strange pressure in my arms caused by adrenaline. I grabbed a heavy screwdriver from the bedside drawer more out of instinct than any real usefulness and slowly walked into the hallway. While I was walking, my phone vibrated again. Motion detected in the garage. I immediately opened the camera, and this time I saw something different. For just 1 second, before the light fully stabilized, the dark outline of a person quickly pulled back into the camera's blind spot. I couldn't see a face or clothing clearly, just an arm and part of a shoulder disappearing out of frame. That was enough for me to immediately call the police. While I spoke to the dispatcher, I kept watching the live camera feed, trying not to miss any movement. I quickly explained that someone was probably circling around the garage and intentionally avoiding the cameras. The dispatcher told me to stay inside and not confront anyone alone. Honestly, I no longer had any courage to go outside at that point. The worst part was imagining how long that person might have been observing the sensors in order to understand exactly where they could stand without appearing properly. While I was still on the phone, the garage light turned on again. And this time I noticed something else disturbing very clearly. The shadow always appeared from the same side of the camera, always exactly at the limit of the visible area, as if whoever was there knew perfectly well the range of the sensor and the angle of the lens. A few seconds later, I heard quick footsteps moving through the side walkway beside the house. Not running in panic, just quick enough to cross the side area without lingering in front of the cameras. Right after that came a low sound from the back door. The very faint noise of someone testing the doorknob. My entire body froze the instant I heard the back doorknob move, not aggressively. It didn't sound like someone immediately trying to break in. It was worse precisely because it sounded careful, as if the person were quietly checking whether the door had been left unlocked. I stayed standing in the hallway holding my phone while the dispatcher asked for my address again, to confirm the responding unit. The whole house seemed silent except for the distant hum of the refrigerator and the wind outside. Then I heard another click at the doorknob, this time a little longer. My heart was racing so violently I started feeling short of breath. I slowly walked into the living room without turning on any lights, trying to see the back of the house through the window. The garage was still illuminated by the automatic floodlight, but the side of the house remained buried in darkness. I couldn't see anyone, and that was exactly what terrified me most. The person was close enough to touch the back door and still managed to stay outside the range of both the cameras and the windows. At one point, I heard a small scraping sound from outside the door, as if someone had brushed a shoe against the concrete while shifting position. Then silence again. The dispatcher told me to stay away from the doors and windows until the police arrived, so I slowly backed into the hallway without taking my eyes off the kitchen. A few seconds later, the garage sensor triggered again. The light turned on brightly, illuminating part of the backyard through the laundry room window. And this time I clearly saw a shadow moving far too quickly near the side wall of the house before disappearing from the camera view again. It didn't look like someone lost or confused. It looked like someone accustomed to moving in the dark while avoiding being seen. My stomach dropped immediately because at that moment it became very clear that the person was circling the entire property, trying to find some vulnerable point. That's when I heard distant sirens approaching down the street. Almost immediately after that came a quick sound from outside. Footsteps speeding across the backyard toward the rear of the garage. I ran to the living room window trying to see something, and managed to catch only a dark figure partially jumping over the back fence before the automatic light shut off again. Seconds later, the patrol cars pulled into the street with flashlights illuminating the front of the house. I had never felt such overwhelming relief in my life. The officers immediately began searching the surrounding yards while I explained everything outside the house. I showed them the camera videos on my phone, and their reaction changed immediately when they noticed the movement patterns. One officer commented that it looked like typical behavior from someone testing security systems before attempting a larger break-in. According to him, people accustomed to thefts in residential neighborhoods often spend days observing where cameras, sensors, and blind spots are located. What disturbed the officers most was the precision of the movements. In several videos, you could see small shadows disappearing exactly before the camera fully captured the person. As if they knew perfectly how far they could go without entering the frame completely, one of the officers then decided to personally inspect the side of the garage. That's when they found fresh shoe prints in the damp dirt right along the narrow strip outside the camera's main range, exactly in the blind spot I had noticed in the app. That made my blood run cold because it confirmed I hadn't imagined any of it. Someone had truly spent the entire night moving around the limits of the system, trying not to appear. While they continued searching the area, an older officer asked whether I had recently mentioned the cameras or sensors to anyone. That's when I remembered that a few days earlier, I had talked about the system with a neighbor while installing a new floodlight near the garage. Nothing suspicious, just a normal neighborhood conversation. Even so, I started thinking about how easy it would be for someone to observe my routines without drawing attention. The worst part came when the officers reviewed older recordings from earlier that week. Footage from 2 previous nights showed the exact same pattern, the garage light turning on with nobody visible, and small shadows appearing only at the edges of the image, meaning that person had probably been watching my house for days before I finally noticed. They never found out who it was. No neighbors recognized any description because there practically wasn't a clear description, just quick shadows and movements that were far too calculated. But there's one part of that story I've never forgotten. One of the officers casually commented while analyzing the footage frame by frame. He already knew exactly where not to appear. And honestly, even today that bothers me more than the attempted break-in itself, because it means that while I was sleeping peacefully believing the cameras were protecting my house, someone was already silently learning how to move around them without being seen.
Thank you very much for your company until the end. Your support is what gives life to this channel. If these stories have caught you, don't forget to leave your like and comment on your opinion. And if you are not yet part of our community, sign up now to receive the next real horror stories.